Sally's nightmare. Why didn't anyone pick Sally? On Fridays at Middleton Elementary, it's dodgeball day. The PE teacher picks two people to be the team captains, and then they get to pick the rest of their teammates. It was the first Thursday of the school year, which meant dodgeball was tomorrow. Sally went home that night very worried that she wouldn't get picked tomorrow because most of the kids in her class are white and she is black. That night she went to bed and she had a bad nightmare about the game. She dreamt that Rachel, who was a team captain, picked all of the white girls before her, and that Thomas, another team captain, picked all of the white boys before her too. She was the last person standing. This dream that Sally is having is her creating a schema about tomorrow's dodgeball game. She is predicting how she thinks the situation will happen because she is a different color than the other people in her class. A schema is a mental model that we develop on how we expect a situation to happen. It comes from second-hand experiences or first-hand. When Sally is creating the schema in her nightmare, she is presented with a threat, which activates the sympathetic adrenal medullary axis, which prepares the body for damage or defeat. Sally is threatened by not being picked because she is the only black person in her class, so she is preparing herself through this schema for the defeat she will feel when she is the last person standing. This initial feeling when Sally isn't picked is fear. Her heart begins to race and her palms begin to sweat. Her amygdala began to collect information about these physical stress reactions, which are caused by the adrenal glands located in the sympathetic nervous system, releasing epinephrine. While Sally stood there with her heart racing from fear, she thought back to when her older cousin, Sam, who is a psychology major, taught her about the biopsychosocial model. This is a model that teaches people how to handle stress. This research showed that people who were taught how to rethink their initial stress reactions and emotions were significantly more successful in a stressful situation. When Sally remembered this, she knew that she needed to speak up to the class to regain self-control over this stressful situation. Sally knew that she needed to use the physical and mental effects she previously used to speak up and tell the other kids that she is good enough to be on their team, despite the color of her skin. Thankfully, Sam was listening to a podcast one day in the car for class called Talking Race with Young Children, hosted by Corey Turner and Anya Kamates. Sally remembered hearing, "Don't push them to be color silent by shutting them down when they do talk about differences." She decided that she needed to spread diversity in a positive way and be proactive about this situation. Use this horrible experience as a way to teach the other kids about diversity and how their differences and similarities are important to embrace. Sally took this information and spoke up. "Thomas, Rachel, I really encourage you to put yourself in my shoes right now." Sally was using the microaggressions triangle model. Microaggression is behaviors or attitudes that favor a specific group, which is what Thomas and Rachel are experiencing. There are negative effects to this, like poor mental health, the creation of a hostile and invalidating climate, the threat of perpetrating stereotypes, and physical health problems. Sally then told Rachel and Thomas to ask themselves, how inclusive or exclusive are my actions? They then took a deep breath and a moment to think about what Sally said. Then said, "I'm sorry, we weren't even aware that we did this." Sally explained the models and resources that her cousin Sam had taught her to her classmates. The rest of the class was shocked that they had behaved like this and didn't even realize it. Rachel expressed that she could be on her team and be a co-captain with her. Rachel and Sally worked so well together that they won the dodgeball game. After the game, Rachel told Sally that she was super thankful that she spoke up. She also said that she will embrace all cultures and differences between the other people. Sally and her classmates have learned how to cope with stress and bias in a healthy way now because of Sally's knowledge of the biopsychosocial model and microaggression. Sally doesn't take any action. A few weeks ago, Sam was teaching Sally about her bystander intervention training that she had to complete for her psychology course, but Rachel was doing so while watching Sally's favorite movie. However, Sally wasn't listening very well because she was experiencing selective hearing, which is the power to only let in the information we want to hear, which actually causes us to miss important information. Sally only wanted to hear the movie instead of listening to her cousin, who was explaining how important it is to speak up when minorities like themselves experience bias. Even though Sally wasn't listening, Sam kept explaining. She said that when situations like this happen, you have to remember the biopsychosocial model. When you begin to sweat and your heart is racing from these threats, your adrenal glands are releasing epinephrine. This model will help you cope with this stress. Due to Sally's lack of listening when she was picked last and experienced these automatic physical stress effects, she didn't know how to cope with it. Therefore, these reactions continued and got worse as she didn't take control. Sally began to rethink irrationally and decided she couldn't speak up because she didn't want to be targeted any more than she already was. Nor did she want Thomas and Rachel to feel insulted, even though they had already made her feel very uncomfortable. Sally kept telling herself that Thomas and Rachel didn't mean to pick her last out of all of the white kids. It was just an accident. The gym teacher continued on with class and said teams are full. Anyone who hasn't been picked has to sit out today. Challenge yourself to rethink how you cope with stress. There is an article written by Trevor Stevens called Distracted. This article describes how his own personal story about how he experienced a life-threatening accident because he was texting and driving. Stevens makes a really interesting point that connects with being essentially blind to coping with stress. He says, my reckless actions would indeed disrupt the lives of countless others. This means that not recognizing bias, whether you're experiencing it or someone else is, it can impact everyone around you. Not speaking up to those who are making a microaggression assault or a threat will affect another person because those who are making it, chances are they probably don't even realize it. So I encourage everyone to educate themselves on the biopsychosocial model and the tool of dealing with stressful situations to not only impact themselves, but everyone. Stephen also says, along with my cherished rust bucket Ford Ranger, I left behind a piece of arrogance. Leave behind your own arrogant feelings and take action when people or yourself are experiencing bias or stressful situations. Here, an emotional stimulus is going to activate your sensory thalamus. An emotional stimulus could be something like, sweaty hands, or you're anxious or you're shaking, and this can be brought up by discriminatory actions or comments, which then goes to your sensory cortex. But if you're taking the low road, which is going to be fast and it's going to go straight to the amygdala, which is going to basically secrete epinephrine. And if you're taking the high road, it's going to be slow, but it's still going to give you those emotional responses, which you're not going to know how to deal with.